Hey everyone, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust, walking around the Manassas National Battlefield Park as we are smack dab in the middle of Second Manassas 160. I'm going to walk around as much as I can today on as many of the 40 miles of walking trail they have on this battlefield. It's a very walkable park to try to talk a little bit about the Battle of Second Manassas. People don't know that one too well. And to maybe provide a poor replacement for those of you who can't come here. So come along for the ride and we'll get as much done as we can. All right, here we are starting our Second Manassas video coverage here on Matthews Hill. This is Matthews Hill. I'm looking generally south. You might be able to see the visitor center on Henry Hill off in the distance, and there's a hill in between, and that is called Buck Hill. Buck Hill is where Union Commander John Pope made his headquarters during the Battle of Second Manassas, or the Battle of Second Bull Run, or the Battle of Second Bull Run, or the Battle of Second Manassas. And as we look further to the west over here, you're going to see or come to what is the main parts of the battlefield. Places you've heard of, the Brawner Farm, the Deep Cut, the scene of Longstreet's assault off in that direction, Chinn Ridge over there. But let me bring the troops up here real quick. It is August of 1862, and the month before, Robert E. Lee had culminated his attacks known as the 7 Days Battles, takes the initiative, moves to the north. Lee barely hangs on, shall I say Jackson. Lee has two wings, one under Stonewall Jackson, one under James Longstreet, and Jackson barely hangs on to win a victory at Cedar Mountain earlier in August, and then they come up this way. Jackson's making chaos in the Union rear, sacking on, I believe it's August 27th, Manassas Junction, an important Union supply depot. And the Union commander, again, this isn't McClellan's army, although part of it would arrive. We're talking about roughly 50,000 men under John Pope. This is sort of a new army, and he is going to wreak havoc on the Confederates, so he said. I imagine you know the quotes. And Pope is convinced that after Manassas Junction, that he's going to be able to trap the Confederates, mainly Jackson, at Centerville. That won't be the case, of course. Jackson is more in this vicinity on the old battlefield of Bull Run that had happened 13 months earlier, and he's going to take position behind an unfinished railroad cut. Every battlefield, right, has a peach orchard, a slaughter pen, a railroad cut, and maybe a sunken road or a stone wall. So he's going to take position behind that. The Battle of Second Manassas will consist of 3 days, August 28th, 29th, and 30th. And on August 28th, Jackson, with half of Lee's army, about 25,000 soldiers, off in that direction, will lure into a fight advanced elements of the Union Army passing by them. That's the Battle of Brawner's Farm, or the Battle of Groveton. On the 29th, things intensify. Pope thinks he can really decimate Jackson, and he starts to send piecemeal attacks against the unfinished railroad cut and really the ridge called the Stony Ridge. That's going to continue on August 29th. In the meantime, here comes James Longstreet's other half of Robert E. Lee's army coming up here, but John Pope almost willfully seems to ignore that threat coming from his flank and rear and continues to launch attacks in that direction, even as the enemy, Longstreet, is massing over in that direction. He just basically ignores it or doesn't believe it. Even on the 30th, he's going to take his reinforcements coming from Fitzjohn Porter. They're coming up from McClellan's Army of the Potomac at this point. And Longstreet can't really attack because Porter's over there, but Porter and Pope are going to oblige Longstreet by moving out of his way and launching the largest attack, a particularly large attack on the Deep Cut on the morning of the 30th. And that provides Longstreet his opportunity on August 30th to move and attack in this direction in one of the largest attacks of the entire Civil War. So that's what you really have. You have the Confederates hanging on at the around the railroad bed and the Stony Ridge. You have the Union launching those attacks and suffering a result and pushing the Confederates to the brink on the 29th and even into the 30th. But then the coup de grace of Longstreet showing up and really getting into the Union rear with a massive attack, and that will seal the victory for the Confederates. If you don't want to watch another minute, there you go. There's your summary. But in the meantime, we're going to walk around as much as we can, and I hope you stay along for the ride. Here we are, overlooking the scene, although a little bit more wooded. The of one of the several attacks on August 29th, 1862. This is the railroad cut over there. You can see it very clearly off in the distance. We'll be walking along that shortly, and it continues across what we call Featherbed Lane or Groveton Road. The Confederates were positioned in and behind it, depending on the peculiarities of the terrain at that point. On August 29th, on a wide plain, the Union will end up launching several other attacks. You've got Sigel attacking, and this starts in the morning. You've got Krasnowski or Shriznowski. Somebody will tell me I did that wrong. And you've got Kearney over there. You've got Stevens attacking, and you've got Cuvier Grover, whose photo on the sign we just saw over there. And the attacks were fierce. They pushed the Confederates to the limit, but they did not happen. They happened, a total of 8 hours apart. They happened all day long. So they really didn't quite penetrate the Confederate line, and when they did, the Confederate line was able to scramble reinforcements. If we were to go up that way, that road would take us to the hamlet of Sudley during the Civil War. It would also take us by two tracks the American Battlefield Trust have already preserved, right over near the Sudley Church, and another larger one many years ago on the left side of the road. And right now we're trying to preserve 3 additional acres off in that direction, and more about that later. All right, now as we walk up along the unfinished railroad grade, again, they had plans for this railroad to go out toward Manassas Gap, I believe it is, but they had not put any ties down, no iron, no trestles, none of that. And we're also in the general vicinity, I don't know exactly where it is, of one of the earlier photos we have here. The Second Manassas Battlefield is not well photographed early on, but you can see how deep this cut was in many locations. Indeed, the area not too far ahead of here would be called the Deep Cut. So let's walk up here and walk along the unfinished railroad for a bit. And then we'll get on to where some of the heaviest attacks of the battle took place. Along the line of the unfinished railroad, it's not always a big deep cut. Sometimes it's just a line through the area. What I really wanted to show you is one of the living witnesses to the battle. And walking along sort of deep cut trail here, I mean, you could find every element of Stonewall Jackson's mid-1862 command on the other side of this rise over here. Lawton, Trimble, Ewell, Tolliver, and all the others. Of course, the situation is different by the 29th because General Ewell has been desperately wounded and William Tolliver is out. While I got you on that, those of you who don't know, if you're from the South, you already do. Or if you study this stuff enough, you already do. But Tolliver and Taliaferro are the same thing. You ever see something written that looks like Taliaferro? It's pronounced Tolliver. What you find walking around Second Manassas is that the soldiers did not think to fight in chronological and geographical order so we could understand it easily. So when you walk along here, especially as you get down further, August 28th, 29th, and 30th can blend, and especially those last 2 dates. Here, we're already talking about August 30th, near the end of the final attack happening here at Second Manassas, at least north of the Warrenton Turnpike. And here's the 15th Alabama. I'll let you all read it on your own. So we've just come out of the woods there on the deep cut trail, and you see things start to open up here. This is the part of the attack on the deep cut that most of you recognize. The trail for most people walks out through that field over there. That's the scene of the Union attack. But now we are close to along the Confederate line here, and you can see that the cut is indeed a lot more deep here, even though video doesn't show these things. I mean, that in the distance looks like it's about 15 to 20 feet deep. So that does no good to, as a breastwork. You want something, 3 to 5 feet deep. So in many cases, the Confederates would have been out behind there, or even in some cases out in front of the railroad grade, so they could shoot over the brow of a hill. And in this area, you've got some Louisianians, you've got Alabamians, you've got Virginians around here, and I believe it's a Louisianian that actually utters one of the most famous moments of the battle when the Confederate Stonewall Jackson's guys are literally out of ammunition. They got nothing else. The Union soldiers are relentlessly pushing on, and a Louisianian yells, "Give them the rocks." And that's when they start gathering what I presume would be red sandstone rocks from the unfinished railroad grade and pelting the Union soldiers who are not far away. Can only throw them so far with those particular rocks. Luckily for them, you have reinforcements showing up. That's AP Hill's division. We're talking August 30th here, I believe. And AP Hill's guys are able to push the Union back, who fought so hard to get close to this position and found it equally dangerous to go back and would suffer the consequences. And all of this on the 30th, the last day of the battle, is just as James Longstreet is launching, or getting ready to launch, his massive attack on the other side of the road. 25,000 soldiers, largely in the rear and flank of the Union Army. If you've been to the Second Manassas Battlefield, there's a good chance you've been right here to the Deep Cut Monument over here. This is really not what it's called. It's called the Groveton Monument. This was erected in mid-June of 1865, right as the Civil War is coming to an end. And it is one of 2 monuments that looks like this at Manassas. But when it was erected, this one had a few differences. First of all, they gathered up a bunch of artillery shells and cannonballs and whatnot that had been all over the ground. But also this, like the other one on Henry Hill, a couple miles from here, was constructed in one day by a bunch of Union cavalrymen of the red sandstone rock from the railroad cut over there. The difference between the 2 monuments in Maine is that the one here at Groveton has stacked cannonballs on top, whereas the one over on the other side has a massive parrot shell on top. Now, what I'll say in looking at this is, you can look in the distance and you see a different scene than today. It's wide open all the way to and a little bit beyond the Groveton Road. It's a little bit hard, the Warrenton Pike. When you look out here, there's woods that happily actually guard or obscure a cemetery, the Stonewall Cemetery over there. The American Battlefield Trust, we were able to preserve 4 of the acres over there that the cemetery was not using, so we got a little bit more of it, but there is a gap. So those woods are out there. Now, this one photo is the only definitely confirmed photo we have of the Second Manassas Battlefield taken during the 1860s. This is it, so enjoy it. Happily, the original does provide a good view of what this looked like at the time. One thing I'll point out, it's hard to read right now, but it says, in the memory of the patriots who fell at Groveton, August 28th, 29th, and 30th, 1862. This was right as the Civil War is ending, and this was sort of a combination of Virginia ladies and Union soldiers put this up, and they were not specific as to those monuments representing either particular side. And man, you can see some very difficult terrain up here. No doubt would have been a little bit more open, but still nasty terrain nonetheless. And we've gone all the way past, we're a third of a mile past the deep cut already, and yet Porter's massive attack would have stretched even this far over. And you've got the Stonewall Brigade of all units, which had been 4,000 strong a year earlier, or 13 months earlier, across the way on Henry Hill, was now reduced to, I think, fewer than 1,000 muskets here. And Union soldiers suddenly popped up, and these guys had to wheel way in to get this far over. And suddenly they popped up and were threatening the Confederate position. The commander of one of the units, I think his name is Baylor, 33rd Virginia, wraps himself in the flag and says, "Follow me, boys, this way." And he leads them down, and the colonel, Baylor, is actually shot while wrapped in the flag. But that is one of the acts of what the Confederates had to do just to hold this position. I can't stress enough, they were at the breaking point at numerous points along the line. And the Union were soon to be as well. We started on Matthews Hill, we crossed the road, we walked up and around through toward the deep cut, walked along the deep cut for a while, then cut over here, and the Brawner Farm is not too far behind me. So now we're blending into that August 29th fight for the Stony Ridge and the unfinished railroad bed. and the fight on August 28th at the Brawner Farm, which took place in front of me and off to my left. The Warrenton Turnpike is off in that direction, and it's along that pike that the Union soldiers are marching, unawares that the Confederates are off to my right and behind me. And Jackson wants to lure him into a fight, and so he does. And here we are at the Brawner house. I believe his name was John Brawner. He was a tenant farmer here, but the house retains his name to this day. In around 2010 or 2011, the Park Service was able to set up an interpretive center here, and I am glad they did, because when it's open, they can provide some excellent interpretation over here and parking and other services for people to see this important part of the battlefield. Here you go, August 28th, 1862. Stonewall Jackson here has been marching like crazy, won at Cedar Mountain, sacked Manassas Junction, needs a rest, but has to protect some of the roads and passes. In other words, means of escape behind me, especially off to the left where he can still conduct active operations if he can make sure he keeps that road over near Sudley available here. And this drawing, even with the shadows, does a pretty good job of showing the Union soldiers marching across the Warrenton Turnpike, which is right out there. This is one time you actually don't see a car there, but trust me, it's right there. And Jackson's got 3 times the number of soldiers on August 28th than he has in front of him, but he's not quite able to muster, you know, his whole force. He's bringing in a brigade, another brigade. In the end, I think it's 6 or 8 Union regiments. I think it's only 6 actually. They happen to be some hard fighting regiments, of which the 2nd Wisconsin is the most experienced. He goads the Union Army into a fight by showing some artillery. The Union thinks they're only firing facing horse artillery, so John Gibbon, later with his Iron Brigade. For now, they're not that, I don't believe. And the 2nd Wisconsin comes through the woods and tries to capture the guns. And all of a sudden, they're tangling with half of the Confederate Army here. The 2nd Wisconsin, 7th Wisconsin, and with a gap, the 6th Wisconsin form over near the Groveton hamlet off in the distance there. Jackson brings in more troops. Here comes Trimble. Here comes Tolliver. But really only a few brigades come in the end, and although the Confederates have more soldiers, they didn't get that 3-to-1 numerical superiority, and it got dark, and this terrible stand-up fight, known as one of the most just awful stand-up fights, not a long fight, to occur during the Civil War, happened in these fields out in front of you and off to the woods in the left here, and it went on and on, just waiting for the sun to set. And that's not the first time that's going to happen during this, not the last time that's going to happen during this battle. As I beat a retreat from the Brawner house out towards some of the facilities they have out here. Let me just say that I hope you've been following on social media. The park's been doing all sorts of great stuff since even before the anniversary. And from what I saw at the Brawner Farm fight over the weekend, they got these kind of integrated units. They had civilians and reenactors, I'll say civilian dressed and reenactors gathering to perform the maneuvers of the Stonewall Brigade opposite the same for the future Iron Brigade. So you had Wisconsin and Wisconsin soldiers facing off against Virginians out in the fields doing the maneuvers. It was hot, but it looked like a nice crowd out here doing it. I've seen even right now, there's a walk going on out at the unfinished railroad. There have been all sorts of various events I've seen, and I'm always really happy to see people coming out to these things. So as we approach the Warrenton Turnpike, we're getting a break in the traffic here, so let's cross. While I say, I can't stress to what degree this was a considerably less traveled and rougher road at the time. God, we got lucky here. This is a very well-traveled road. In 1863 and 1865, people talked about traveling this road. It was rocky. There were basically fords across the streams. There were, if you had a bridge, it was a 1-lane bridge. It was certainly not 4 lanes with a divided highway sort of in the middle in this area, and a cool view of the Brawner Farm over there. Even in 1900, this was a rocky, nasty road. So kind of glad to be leaving the modern version of it behind as well as we cross onto the south side of the Warrenton Turnpike here. And this, from here on, now that we're on the south side of the road, most of what is happening here, at least in terms of battle action, is going to concern August 30th. James Longstreet's troops marching across this very terrain to unhinge the Union line. although I think that this is roughly my 300th trip to the Manassas National Battlefield Park, I've already been on like 4 short trails at least that I've never even been on before, including this spot right here. I've never been here. Stuart's Hill is over there to the west. And were we to look to the east, right in front of us, in 1861 and beyond, there would have been a declining plantation house called Meadowville, owned by a guy named Cuniff, I believe, and he would have had the house here. It didn't last too long after the Civil War, and then there was a modern structure on top of it, and apparently there's some rubble in the woods over there. This was a hospital, this area, and you can see behind the lines here of Longstreet's attack, you know, would have been a good location. By the way, Brawner is off that way about a mile. So we're looking east here, and on August 30th, you have James Longstreet launching his massive attack off in this direction. Hood's division, you know, you've got Kemper's division, and then neighbor Jones's division. 3 big divisions going off in that direction. Before this happened, somewhere in this vicinity, you can try to picture it, Robert E. Lee and James Longstreet and Stonewall Jackson and Jeb Stuart met on top of this hill to plan out the remainder of the battle after Lee and Longstreet had arrived here. Pretty heady moment. It would work pretty well for the Confederates, I'd say. Later, there's going to be a second, a third, and a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth battle for Manassas for the preservation of this land. The land around us here, known as Stuart's Hill, was going to be extensively developed in, I believe, 1987 or 1988. Preservationists, U.S. Congress got together and purchased more than 500 acres here to preserve it and add it to the Manassas National Battlefield Park. I think you know Disney wanted to get around here, and there have been numerous threats to this battlefield around here. And this is one of the reasons, Manassas, in this specific area, that the modern battlefield preservation movement was born. It was Manassas, it was Chantilly, it was Antietam. And luckily, that happened to coincide with the 125th anniversary of the Civil War, and the modern movement was born, and that's why we can, among other things, bring you these videos today, which we hope in the long run will help us to preserve more and more battlefields, for which we thank you for your support. As you can probably hear, you get to the southern reaches of the park, it places you directly along Interstate 66, which you might be able to see buzzing off in the distance there. Although, we maybe should feel fortunate that it didn't even go closer to the park. That was another early preservation fight. Would 66 go directly through the park? Would it go on what is now the Warrenton Turnpike? Glad to have it safely over here rather than a little further to the north. And by the way, here we are coming to one of the other sites of a wartime structure, Brownsville. This is only my second time here in all the times I've been coming. A pretty obscure place, but the park dutifully mows the trails, for which I compliment them. Nice job, Manassas National Battlefield Park. You know, the first battle, it really escaped, and you know, it was really right in the path of Longstreet's attack. The Battle of Second Manassas. We are not even to, but close to Longstreet's right flank, if you could imagine it. Neighbor Jones over there. I'm going off memory, so I hope I got this right. Neighbor Jones way over there, Kemper here, and Hood over there. I mean, this is 25,000 soldiers. They take up a lot of space, even if they are ready to go in a compact formation and pack a punch. Walking through the big picnic area called the Brownsville picnic area along Groveton Road south of the Warrenton Turnpike. You can access a couple of trails from here. Warrenton Turnpike is off that way, deep cut there, Henry Hill and Chinn Ridge back there. All right, I just came from Brownsville picnic area, which is about a mile in that direction, and that brings me along the Groveton-Sudley Road, or the Groveton Road, to, I think, one of only a couple original wartime structures in the park. That's the Lucinda Dogan House, if I'm correct. And you can see they're doing some work on it right now. The unfinished railroad bed is off in front of us over there. Matthews Hill is off in that direction, and we're now going to continue along Hood's attack. This is August 30th. This is the first of Longstreet's divisions to hit. We're talking about Texans, of course, it's Hood, but also I think Georgians and South Carolinians along with them. And here's the key. The bulk of, and I mean the great bulk of, I mean like if there's still 42,000 troops left in Pope's army, 41,000 of them are on the other side of the road, and most of those are facing that way. There's a skirmish line under here. New Yorkers, I believe it's the 10th New York, is up here. And luckily, Governor K. Warren, who has a small brigade, saw that some cannons were over here and might need some support, and brought his brigade to the other side of the road, bringing the Union strength to a grand roughly 1,000 or so, with the 10th New York, the 5th New York, and some other New York elements behind them. And here come 25,000 Confederates right across this ground here. Hood was the spearhead, and the 10th New York and some of the cannons fire some shots, but that's not going to slow them down, at least much. All right, we just came out of the woods from the west. Now I'm looking generally north up New York Avenue because the New York monuments are here. And we've got the 5th New York monument, Duryea-Zuov's. We've got the 10th over there. I already mentioned them. I believe, I'm going from memory, the 10th was out on the skirmish line, and here comes the 5th. The 5th New York made a famous heroic stand, and they were supposedly in the vortex of hell on the afternoon of August 30th. You can see what's behind them over here. Hood's guys are coming from here. The fewer than 500 men of the 5th New York, which had already seen some significant action on the peninsula 7 days, specifically at the Battle of Gaines's Mill. These guys in their Zouave uniforms came and will suffer more than 100 killed. And here it is, the vortex of hell. And suffice to say, you can read a whole book by Brian Pohanka about this unit and learn all about them. But for us, the 5th New York and the 10th New York quickly fall back. Confederates are firing at both those units. The 5th New York had to wait for the 10th to sort of retire from the skirmish line before they could get some good shots at the Confederates, but they did not get many. There are just too many Confederates, and for all their sacrifice, hundreds of people killed and wounded, the 5th New York barely slowed down the Confederate attack under Longstreet. Now, in the meantime, Pope has finally gotten the message, and he understands that he's in trouble and understands that Longstreet is actually here. And he and others begin to scramble at least a few brigades over to the south side of the Warrenton Turnpike. And some of those are going to put up some valiant stands on Chinn Ridge first, and then in the road next to Henry Hill primarily. And here we have just happened upon the Chinn Ridge area. You see a cannon there. You might be able to spot the foundation of the Chinn house off in the distance. You know, I think we have to walk over there because it's a pretty cool foundation, even though the house no longer stands. I think it was there until roughly the 1940s. Maybe as we get closer, it'll tell me the name of the house. All of the houses around here have names like Avon and Spring Hill, and as you saw, Brownsville, Portici, and some others. So let's go a little bit closer. I think there's going to be a picture of the house, and I'm sure it'll tell us the name. Of course, this area figures prominently in the First Battle of Manassas, where Confederates wrap around what's left of the Union Army, and that Union Army that's left in First Manassas is off to the left there. Olive Otis Howard's New England Brigade, who come on the hottest part of the day and just get completely enveloped. And to a pretty orderly retreat, some of the units at least do it. Here it is, Hazel Plain. I couldn't remember it. Here's what it used to look like. You can see the foundation right there. That's that foundation right there. And Benjamin Chinn was living here at the time. If you were to go a little further down, you would see little local cemetery, H-O-O-E. Hua, or Who, perhaps. But here you go. The Chinn house remains. You can walk into them, pretty cool stuff. And as we look to the west, this is the scene of James Longstreet's attack. Again, with Hood way over there, and Kemper coming up behind him, and Neighbor Jones, D.R. Jones coming up behind him. And the Union under Pope is now trying to scramble reinforcements off in that direction there, and that's what's going to happen. Notably, you have a brigade fighting really hard, and you've got the 12th Massachusetts near, at least I think the head of that brigade, Fletcher Webster, descendant of Daniel Webster, in command of that unit over there. And this is some rough fighting there, but one brigade, then another brigade, and then another end up showing up here. And then it sort of sucks the Confederates in, and it's slowing them down for a while. But the Union soldiers are all sort of oriented in this direction over here, facing in this way, when all of a sudden you've got South Carolinians and other soldiers showing up on their flank, and that will collapse this Union position here. So the New York line has collapsed. This line, after some hard fighting and slowing down the Confederates quite a bit, is also going to collapse. And by then, Commander Pope has started to order numerous other units over toward Henry Hill in preparation for a retreat. He knows what's going on now. Question is, can they hold on long enough until that sun in the west dips down low enough for the Union to effect a good retreat to the east? Here we are walking a little bit north of the Chinn house remains. A Chinn foundation is a quarter mile or so off in that direction. You might be able to see some cannons silhouetted atop the hill over there. Those are from the 5th Maine Battery. The 5th Maine was rushed down here to help with the Union defense on August 30th. But then the Confederates come in. I think it's the 1st Virginia Cavalry. You got a guy named Skinner carrying his grandfather's, I think, Revolutionary War sword, and he starts cutting people down until he's eventually wounded, saying, remember that I was the first one in amongst the guns. Those guns are going to be critical to the defense, along with Towers Brigade, Stiles Brigade. Since while we're here and I talked about them already, I thought I would take you to the monument that denotes the approximate death site of Fletcher Webster, 12th Mass, leading the unit, dedicated 1914. But on our way out, let's make sure we take a look at the pink Texas granite inscribed Texas Memorial. These tend to be some of the smaller state memorials on battlefields, but there are a lot of them, at least 15 of these, and maybe you've seen them at Chickamauga, Shiloh, Gettysburg, Antietam. Here's one right here at Chinn Ridge. And by the way, the granddaddy of them all, as far as I know, outside of Texas at least, is at Vicksburg, where they have a huge pink Texas granite monument, along with yucca trees out in front to finish the presentation. Now, we're going to go off in that direction over back toward the visitor center. All right, here we are coming to what I think will be more familiar territory for most of y'all. Here is the Sudley Road. That's looking north. Visitor center right up there. It looks like I got some time before the traffic's going to let me go, so let me just say that during the first battle, like most roads that were here at the time, there were sunken portions, and you can get some good cover over there. So you're going to have Union soldiers hiding out in there, getting ready to attack in that direction. Later in the first battle, the Confederates occupied this road to go in this direction. And in this battle, Second Manassas, you've got Confederates storming up against the road in this direction, for the last Union holdout is over here. The Yankees are putting up a pretty staunch defense in the road right here. I'm going. A pretty staunch defense here, but the Confederates think they've got it. A brigade, I think it's Benning's Georgia Brigade, is working their way over here. But then here come more Union reinforcements, and there goes the sun. And all of a sudden it's getting dark. The Union Army is already in retreat. The Confederate opportunity, at least this day, has been lost. The Union will retreat in that direction. I think the Battle of Chantilly will follow on September 1st. A nasty battle, stalemate in the rain. And that's really the Confederates' last chance to really get at Pope and company before the Union Army reaches the safety of the area around Washington, where the whole Army of the Potomac is starting to arrive. and the Confederates can no longer have parity in numbers. Nonetheless, they have won a massive victory here. We still have a little bit more to see. There it is, Chinn Ridge there, deep cut way over there, Matthews Hill about a mile to the north. Well, this is much more of a First Manassas view, but man, as if I'm gonna walk right by all this without saying anything. So I'm walking among the guns of Ricketts Battery from the Battle of Bull Run, or First Manassas here. This particular battery, of course, Ricketts is up here. You see that the rifled guns probably should have been on the ridge over, because they could have completely outgunned and outdistanced the Confederate cannons in the edge of the woods over there. Stonewall Jackson's guys in support over there. Of course, there's Confederates in the Henry house. That's not the original house. That is a rebuild post-war, because the original one got damaged during the battle and further taken down by Confederates who camped around here in the winter of 1861-62. But during the battle, there are sharpshooter snipers inside there, and Ricketts turns one of his guns toward the building. It's during that fire that Judith Henry, who allowed herself to be evacuated by her sons, but found that it was even more dangerous over there, so to try to leave. So they ended up going back to the house, and there she will be terribly wounded by some shrapnel. You have other just damage going on to the house, but the Confederates fall back. Griffin's guns are on the other side, and that's a whole different story. But over there behind the house, you can also see the monument to the Patriots of the battle here of Bull Run on Henry House Hill. Like I said, looks a lot like the other one, except on top you can see the parrot shell. By the way, those parrot shells were artillery shells were live until the 1940s. Here's a wide-angle shot along the road showing the stone house. There's a couple of cool old shots showing it. Usually don't see this one. That's Young's Branch in the foreground, and then you can see the house, of course, in the background. This was owned by a Matthews, not the same Matthews brothers who own Matthews Hill, or for whom Matthews Hill is named, but other Matthews nonetheless. In some of the other shots, you can actually see some people standing here. There's probably one of the Robinson boys right there. You can see a guy holding a cannonball. And if you zoom in on this picture, you can line up individual original stones. Yes, this is the original house. I'll say one more thing about the stone house. It didn't remain under Matthews ownership for very long. Around 1865, it was sold to Gideon and Jane Starbuck. They tried to operate sort of a tavern and an inn with a restaurant, and they couldn't make a go of it, making it Virginia's first failed Starbucks location. Here I am at last standing on Buck Hill, which I referenced much earlier in the video. There's the stone house, there's Henry Hill, there's of course the visitor center, Chinn Ridge over there, the Brawner Farm, a couple of miles, 2.5 miles off in that direction, Stuart's Hill a little bit further in that direction, the unfinished railroad running off way in that direction over toward the deep cut, perhaps over there. And here he is, John Pope. This is where he made his headquarters, up here on Buck Hill. And on Buck Hill, you can actually see it right here. I'll tell you what, it is every bit as steep as that. That's the hardest hill I climbed on the whole walk. You can see the stone house right below it, and you can see that we just walked up right to where we are now. You can see the road, the Groveton-Sudley Road, or Manassas-Sudley Road, sorry, off in that direction. From here, Pope, would direct his operations, being assured of success by himself. He, regardless of any other information, was sure he had Stonewall Jackson cornered, and he was, singularly it seems, focused on that one thing. And when Longstreet was coming, he said, don't worry, he's not there. We got Fitzjohn Porter out there. He's not here anyway. And continued smashing against the Confederates, making limited gains, but eventually, from somewhere in this vicinity, would have gotten word or been able to see or hear Confederate attack unfolding on the south side of the road. At that point, he did leap to action. He did send troops to Henry Hill and to Chinn Ridge over there, but too little too late, at least for any sort of a victory, but not too little too late to allow this Union Army, this Army of Virginia, to fight another day, to eventually merge these units to become some of the meat of the Army of the Potomac, to take on their Confederate adversaries later. The Confederates, for their part, achieved a great victory here, but A, at what cost, and B, to what end. They didn't destroy Pope's army. It did allow the Confederates, nonetheless, to continue riding that initiative all the way up into Maryland. And they'll come to grips, of course, at a place called Sharpsburg on the Antietam battlefield. Hey everyone, I might look a little bit worse for wear, but here we are at the end at the Matthews Hill parking area. We really hope you enjoyed this anniversary visit to the Second Manassas Battlefield with little elements of the first, getting to see some of the work that you, members of the American Battlefield Trust, are able to do. And it's because of you all that we're able to preserve battlefields, help teachers teach the Civil War, the American Revolution, the War of 1812 in the classroom, and of course, have a little bit left over to send people out to battlefields where you can shoot video and march just about 11 miles in less than 4 hours. So thanks so much for your support, and am I too tired to finish this up? Thanks so much for supporting battlefield preservation and education.